No one in the Maple Glen subdivision expected anything remarkable to happen on a Tuesday morning. It was a neighborhood defined by quiet predictability, beige houses, trimmed lawns, and polite waves that didn't require conversation. But that was before Karen Wexler, known unofficially as HOA. Karen unveiled her masterpiece. At precisely 9 o'clock, a truck rumbled up to her driveway carrying industrial-sized buckets of blinding neon pink paint. Not soft pink, not pastel blush, but a fluorescent, eye-searing shade that looked like bubblegum dipped in a highlighter. By noon, the painters had slathered half her house in the color, dazzling anyone who passed by. Residents emerged from their homes, squinting behind sunglasses they didn't normally wear, stunned into a rare silence. The HOA president, Marla Dorsey, nearly dropped her clipboard when she turned the corner and saw the radiant atrocity blazing in the sun. Instantly, phones appeared. Photos were taken. Group chats ignited. Something unprecedented had happened. Maple Glen had color. To understand why Karen had taken such a drastic step, one had to look back to the spring HOA meeting 2 weeks earlier. Karen, who had always held strong opinions about individual liberty, wanted to install solar panels. Nothing outrageous, just a modest, environmentally responsible setup. But Marla and her loyal board rejected the proposal unanimously, citing aesthetic uniformity, a phrase Karen despised almost as much as she despised the HOA itself. That meeting had ended in an argument, a slammed door, and Marla announcing a new fine structure for unapproved modifications. Karen left seething and plotting. When the paint truck arrived, the entire neighborhood realized her revenge had taken physical form. Some residents whispered admiration for her audacity. Others were horrified. Children loved it immediately, pointing and laughing as though a carnival had replaced the house. But adults gasped at this violation of the sacred HOA guidelines, which mandated all homes remain within a narrow palette of beige, taupe, clay, sand, or the adventurous, warm wheat. Pink was not on the list. Karen, however, stood proudly in her driveway supervising the painters. She wore oversized sunglasses, a sun hat, and a smug smile that radiated triumph. Whenever someone slowed their car to stare, she lifted a hand and waved cheerfully, as though hosting a grand opening. By sunset, the house glowed like a neon beacon. The pink shimmered beneath the streetlights, an unmistakable challenge to the HOA's authority. People gathered on sidewalks, some fascinated, others outraged, all buzzing with speculation about what Marla would do. Karen sat on her porch with a tall iced tea, watching the commotion with satisfaction. Her message was clear: if the HOA wanted a fight, she was fully prepared. The next morning, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting in Marla's living room, which smelled faintly of lavender and panic. Papers were spread across the coffee table, including a highlighted copy of the community bylaws. Marla paced back and forth in her immaculate heels, muttering indignantly about an unforgivable breach of decorum. The other board members, Gerald, Nancy, and politely nodding Sandra, watched her with varying degrees of concern. No one had ever defied the HOA so boldly. Violations were usually minor: grass too long, garbage cans left out, porch lights too bright. But a fluorescent pink house? That was neighborhood treason. Marla insisted they take immediate disciplinary action. But the bylaws contained a shocking loophole. While they dictated what colors were recommended, they did not specify banned colors. This oversight left the board uncertain, angry, and deeply embarrassed. Karen had found the flaw and exploited it with ruthless precision. Gerald suggested drafting a new bylaw immediately. But updates required a community vote. And given how many neighbors enjoyed the scandalous spectacle, it was unclear whether such a rule would pass. Outside, residents were divided. Some saw the pink house as an act of rebellion they secretly admired. Others worried property values would plummet or that Maple Glen would become a tourist curiosity. A few teenagers had already taken selfies in front of the house, tagging it with outrageous captions. Meanwhile, Karen enjoyed the chaos. She carried herself with the satisfied air of someone who had not only won a battle but ignited a war. Whenever joggers passed by, she cheerfully greeted them and gestured proudly at her pink monument. By noon, the HOA had delivered an official notice to Karen's door, a warning that her home's color may be subject to review pending clarification of guidelines. Karen laughed out loud. She pinned the notice to her door like a trophy. That afternoon, she hosted a small gathering on her porch, offering pink lemonade to amused neighbors. Marla drove by, staring daggers in Karen's direction. But Karen simply raised her glass in a mocking toast. The board reconvened at sunset, each member more frazzled than the last. They brainstormed an emergency amendment, a temporary order, even contacting legal counsel. But every option risked backlash or complications. Marla's voice trembled with indignation as she declared, "We cannot let this stand. Today it's pink, tomorrow someone will paint their house lime green." The others nodded uncertainly. For the first time in years, the HOA didn't feel invincible. Karen had struck a nerve, and the entire neighborhood could feel the balance shifting. Maple Glen was no longer beige. It had entered a new era, bright, chaotic, and impossible to ignore. By the third day, Karen's house had become a local attraction. Cars drove slowly down Maple Glen Drive, windows rolled down, families pointing as though viewing a landmark. Some residents were thrilled by the sudden notoriety. Others wished desperately for anonymity to return. The neighborhood's private Facebook group erupted with debates. Posts appeared every few minutes, some praising Karen for her bold stand against an overbearing HOA. Others condemning her for inviting visual madness. Memes circulated. Someone even photoshopped Marla in front of the house holding a fire extinguisher. The board members hated it, but the younger residents found it hysterical. Meanwhile, Karen reveled in the attention. She placed a cheerful "Welcome to the Pink Palace" sign in her yard. Children stopped to take photos. A local blogger wrote an article calling her a modern suburban vigilante, which delighted her even more. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. A handful of residents formed a group calling themselves Protect Our Palette, meeting in hushed gatherings to express their horror. They argued passionately that without regulation, Maple Glen would descend into color chaos. They drafted letters, circulated petitions, and discussed fundraising for legal action. But for every signature they gathered, Karen collected 2 supporters who appreciated her defiance. Marla felt her authority slipping. She attempted to hold an emergency town hall in the clubhouse. But only half the neighborhood attended. And most came just to enjoy the drama. When Marla introduced a proposal for strict color limitations, she was met with groans and eye rolls. One resident asked why solar panels were denied in the first place. Another demanded transparency about how decisions were made. Questions piled up, none flattering to the HOA. Marla struggled to maintain control, her frustration evident in every clipped sentence. Karen arrived halfway through the meeting wearing a bright pink scarf, smiling sweetly as the room murmured with amusement. The tension reached a tipping point when a resident named Tom proposed a radical notion, perhaps Maple Glen needed less restriction, not more. He pointed out that joy, individuality, and community spirit were more valuable than uniformity. His remarks sparked applause from many attendees and scowls from the HOA loyalists. Karen beamed proudly at him. The meeting dissolved into heated conversations, leaving the board flustered and overwhelmed. That night, neighborhood alliances crystallized. Some vowed to defend HOA order. Others welcomed the dawning freedom Karen represented. The pink house, once merely a provocation, had become a symbol. It represented rebellion, creativity, and a challenge to unyielding authority. Maple Glen stood divided, unsure whether the changes underway were a disaster or a much-needed awakening. 1 week after the pink paint first shocked Maple Glen, the atmosphere in the neighborhood reached a surreal blend of tension and festivity. Supporters decorated their mailboxes with small pink ribbons, while opponents erected signs reading, "Restore Order." The HOA board, exhausted and desperate for resolution, scheduled a final community vote to determine the fate of the pink house and the future of neighborhood guidelines. The clubhouse buzzed with anticipation as residents filed in, some wearing pink accessories as a statement, others dressed in muted tones to demonstrate loyalty to tradition. Marla stood at the front with the determination of someone fighting for her legacy, while Karen took a seat near the back, sipping from a pink travel mug and savoring the spectacle. The meeting opened with Marla delivering a stern speech about preserving property values and maintaining uniformity. She warned that allowing unregulated colors would plunge Maple Glen into visual chaos. Her words were polished but brittle, each sentence sharpened by weeks of irritation. When she finished, Karen rose to speak. The room fell silent, as she strolled to the front with the confidence of a champion entering a ring. Karen argued passionately that individuality brought vibrancy and life to a neighborhood. She recounted her solar panel rejection and explained that her pink house was not just revenge but a statement against unreasonable control. She urged residents to consider whether their community should be defined by fear of difference or embrace of expression. Her speech drew applause, some loud, some hesitant, but undeniably present. The debate continued for nearly an hour, with residents on both sides sharing concerns, hopes, and frustrations. Ultimately, ballots were distributed. Every hand trembled slightly as votes were cast. The counting took only minutes but felt like eternity. When the results were announced, the room erupted. Karen's right to keep her pink house had been upheld by a narrow but decisive majority. The HOA's strict color regulations were rejected, replaced by a more flexible guideline system that encouraged harmony without suffocating creativity. Marla's face fell, but the neighborhood buzzed with energy as people discussed the newfound freedom. Karen stepped outside into the cool evening air. Her house glowed proudly under the streetlights, brighter than ever. Neighbors gathered around her, some offering congratulations. Others simply relieved the battle was over. Even Tom clapped her shoulder in appreciation. Although the divide hadn't vanished entirely, a sense of unity returned, shakier, perhaps, but more authentic. Maple Glen had been transformed, not by chaos but by conversation, courage, and a splash of bold color. Karen smiled, taking in the scene. The Pink Palace had changed everything, and the neighborhood would never be the same.